Welcome to National Parks Traveler, where we explore the national parks and the issues that involve them.
Rocky Mountain National Park in Colorado, year in and year out, is one of the most popular units of the national park system. Its rugged peaks attract climbers, its heavily forested backcountry lures hikers and backpackers, and its wildlife attracts photographers and visitors hoping to glimpse elk or catch their unique bugling or spot bighorn sheep. This is Kurt Repenchek, your host at National Parks Traveler. As popular as Rocky Mountain National Park is, it's not too surprising that the heavy visitation brings problems to the park. And in 2020, those problems were exasperated by the East Troublesome and Cameron Peak wildfires. To discuss those issues and other issues in the park, we've invited Rocky Mountain Superintendent Darla Sidles to join us. Welcome to the Traveler, Darla.
Thank you, Kurt. Happy to be here.
Boy, it's been a whirlwind 18 months or so, hasn't it? First with COVID and then the wildfires.
Yes, it's certainly been challenging over the last 18 months for sure.
Keeps you nimble, I'm guessing. COVID, of course, one of the big problems was you had to manage visitation, and so that led to implementation of the timed entry system to manage crowds in the park. How did that go?
Right. Well, so as many parks experienced last year, when COVID hit, we had to close the park for a couple of months. And in order to be able to open the park back safely and provide adequate access for visitors, we started looking at ways, how can we safely get those visitors back? So we got an interdisciplinary team of park folks together, started talking with our local communities here, and just started brainstorming about ways we could do that. A timed entry permit system pilot was the idea we chose to try out last year. And, anytime you're first doing these kinds of things, there's certainly challenges and, getting the staff trained. Well, first of all, just coming back from being 2 months where, many of the staff were teleworking, and now we suddenly are opening the park. And on top of that, implementing a timed entry system. There was certainly some challenges getting staff trained and getting the public informed about what to expect. Despite that, the first month was maybe a little bit rocky, so to speak, but the overall result, I think, definitely achieved our goals. We were able to spread out that visitation over a longer period. So in essence, we were taking out the peaks from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. is our biggest surge of visitation. And having a timed entry system helps to spread that use out over a longer period or a longer day. So we did implement that. I think it was successful. Certainly there's always going to be challenges with anything that's new. At the end of that year, last year, we came together and did an after-action review to kind of look at, hey, what went well, what could we do better? And as a result of that, we made a few changes and then came forward this year with a modified timed entry system.
Certainly from a distance, it looked like things ran pretty smoothly, which says a lot for you and your staff and pulling it together under the stressful circumstances and then implementing it. What changes did you make? What did what stood out as you needed to tweak a little bit coming into 2021?
Right. Well, I think the biggest thing was we ended up implementing kind of two different systems this year, or two different permits. So anybody that's familiar with the Rocky knows that the Bear Lake corridor is by far our most popular. It's the Eiffel Tower of Rocky, per se. So we said, we know we need to address Bear Lake and the huge crowds there. So we implemented a timed entry system for that area that started at 5 a.m. and it ends at 6 p.m. And then we said, okay, if we're going to do that for Bear Lake, what happens to the rest of the park? And as we know, since we've been, looking at different ways to manage visitation since 2016, anytime you put a squeeze in one place, it pops out somewhere else. And so we had some concerns that limiting the use at Bear Lake might have some negative impacts to the rest of the park. in such that, knowing we would probably see this COVID bump or COVID surge this year, we were concerned that there would be a higher level of congestion and crowding and resource damage in the rest of the park if we only did Bear Lake. So we came up with a modified approach where that second permit was a rest of park. So it covers essentially the rest of the park, and it only lasted from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. So that system was only in effect for 6 hours each day. And again, trying to take care of that surge from 10 to 2. So it allowed people to, if you did not have a reservation, they could still come in before 9 a.m. or after 3 p.m. for the rest of the park. And then we also made a change to each day at 5 o'clock, we allocate a certain number of permits, and people can get those permits or put in for those permits for the following day. We did not have that last year. We did have a different system, but with this one, we found this one to be more effective. And, we also, as we went through the summer after July, we said, you know what, we've got a number of no-shows. And how do we deal with that? So we were able to increase the number of permits that we offer kind of last minute, as we say, those 5 p.m. each days.
I know a lot of people don't like using Recreation Gov to make any type of reservations in the park system because of the various problems that can arise with that. And, it sounds like having those next day tickets really took some of the burden off of that and pleased a lot of people who do like spontaneity and show up at the last minute when they decide to make their travel plans.
Yes, exactly. Between the 5 p.m. and the shorter reservation period for the rest of the park, we're able to accommodate pretty much anybody that wants to come to the park. You just have to, plan ahead and time your visit.
How many next day passes would you have available on an average day? Does it fluctuate from day to day, or did it fluctuate from day to day?
No, and Kurt, I don't remember exactly what our initial allocation was, but when we realized we had a number of no-shows, we did increase that allocation, I believe, up to about 25% of the total.
Wow. Okay. Now, of course, COVID brought a great outpouring to the great outdoors, and many national parks struggled at points between the increased visitation and the reduced staff that you've had to deal with because of the COVID situation and being able to house and manage your staff. And of course, there have been complaints from many visitors in recent years about growing congestion in Rocky Mountain National Park. And I know you're exploring solutions to that. How's that process coming along?
Are you specifically requesting information about our long-term planning?
Yeah.
Okay, right. So as you mentioned, we know we've been receiving a number of issues related to congestion and the visitor use for at least 6 years now. There was a 44% increase, and Rocky Mountain National Park was the third most visited park in the country in 2019. So we recognized, a few years ago that we need to do something about this, and we embarked on a long-term visitor use plan. We actually have an acronym for it, the Day Use Visitor Access Strategy, and we're specifically looking at long-term day use. And the reason why we are confining it to day use is because we've already got a campground reservation system in place that's been in place for a long time, with our 5 campgrounds and our almost 300 backcountry sites. All of those overnight opportunities have been under reservation systems in the past, so we don't really need to contend with the overnight use.
Right.
The day use, however, as I mentioned, seeing that congestion, that level of congestion, the resource issues, the parking problems, the staff impacts, just a poor visitor experience really helped us, come to the conclusion we need a long-term plan. So as I mentioned, last year's pilot and this year's pilot are helping to inform that long-term plan. We, this year in May, did 5 different meetings to talk about what we're planning for the long-range day use strategy. 2 of those were for visitors, and 1 was for stakeholders and partners, and we also, of course, included staff. So during those public engagement meetings, we talked about what the issue is with, the crowding and the resource damage and the visitor experience and all of our staff capacity and our operational capacity. And then we just talked about ways that we might think about in the future addressing this. We did talk a little bit about these last 2 years, or I guess at that point it was really just last year, lessons learned from that and how it's becoming more common, not just in Rocky, but in other parks and even here in the surrounding area. The Forest Service is really all starting to look at different ways to manage visitation with such as these permit systems. So we've had that initial public engagement. We have not begun the NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act process yet. This is just a real preliminary opportunity for the public to get engaged, where we talk about the park's desired future conditions, the thresholds, the indicators and thresholds, how we might monitor that use in the future. And got input on that. We'll be releasing a report about the public comments with that. I believe we got over 800 comments on that. And then the next steps really are to start refining, the things that we've been doing. We'll have a public engagement process again. That's probably another year and a half away in 2023, where we actually begin the NEPA process. We'll do a public scoping then. Hopefully in 23, we'll be preparing a draft visitor use management plan, which will, have another opportunity for the public to provide input. And then if all goes well, in 2024, we should have a finalized visitor management strategy.
Yeah, I'm curious. I mean, Rocky's not the only national park that has crowding issues, if you want. And I know there's long been calls, the public employees for environmental responsibility almost annually bring up, why don't parks set a hard cap? Congress directed them to do that decades ago. Is it possible to put a hard cap on visitation in place temporarily while you're going through this NEPA process to manage the visitor experience?
Yeah, I think our goal here at Rocky really is to be adaptive and be able to respond to changing situations and conditions. For example, this year, we knew we were going to see that COVID bump. So, we were able to reallocate the number of permits, as I mentioned earlier, when we saw that there was a certain amount of no-shows. I don't know that we're really shooting for a specific number, because I think, that could change depending upon which area of the park you're in and, which areas are getting more crowding and that sort of thing. I think we are really striving to monitor the situation and, be as responsive as possible to the changing conditions. We do recognize that, there is a kind of a sweet spot, and I think we've hit it this year, but we don't yet have enough information or data to be able to identify that that's a specific number.
Is it safe to assume that the experience you've gained last year and this year from the timed entry is providing good data to help you with some of your future decision making?
Oh, absolutely. That's been kind of a hallmark of our process going forward, Kurt, is just making sure that we do have all of the adequate data and research, and we've been collecting it for a long time. And so just continuing to get that information, determining what those data gaps are, so that over this next year we can continue to do any research that is needed, including surveys of the public who did use the system this year, what went well, what didn't, that sort of thing. And then a very important part of this, of course, is talking to our other colleagues across the Park Service that are also trying these sorts of systems, and not just the other parks, but for example, the Arapahoe Roosevelt National Forest has implemented it in a couple of popular areas this year as well. So just comparing and contrasting, continuing to learn from each other what works, what doesn't, that is a very big factor in how we move forward.
Sure. We're talking today with Rocky Mountain National Park Superintendent Darla Sidles about issues in that park, and we're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back.
The Blue Ridge Parkway Foundation is the primary nonprofit fundraising partner for the Blue Ridge Parkway. It is made up of people who have a deep love for this majestic road and want to ensure that its natural beauty and the experiences it offers endure for generations to come. Show your appreciation at brpfoundation.org. Acadia National Park is one of the 10 most popular national parks in the United States. It is also one of the smallest and most vulnerable. That's why Friends of Acadia exists. Friends of Acadia is an independent organization of passionate people inspiring those who love this magnificent park to make a real and lasting difference for Acadia. You can make a difference too at friendsofacadia.org. The Grand Teton National Park Foundation is a private, nonprofit organization that supports projects that protect and enhance Grand Teton National Park's cultural, historic, and natural resources. By funding initiatives that go beyond what the National Park Service could accomplish on its own, Foundation donors improve the visitor experience and provide benefits to the National Park System for decades to come. See their successes at gtnpf.org. Do you love one-click shopping? With our partner, Interior Federal Credit Union, you can earn rewards just by making online purchases. You're missing out on rewards if you're not using their Visa credit and/or debit card. By adding these cards to your online shopping cart with Amazon, Walmart, or other shopping retailers, you can earn a point for every dollar you spend. Binge watching a lot with streaming services like Netflix or Hulu? Use their card for recurring payments to earn points as well. Visit their website, interiorfcu.org, and read their blog for more details about how to apply. The North Cascades Institute has a large portfolio. It is an environmental learning center, training center, conference center, and leadership center, all set in the splendor of the North Cascades National Park Complex. Learn more at ncascades.org. Nova Scotia. 8,000 miles of coastline dotted with colorful fishing villages, quaint coastal towns, and an abundance of scenic natural beauty. Home to 2 national parks, Cape Breton Highlands and Kejimkujik. Spend your nights under a canopy of twinkling stars. Spend your days exploring trails, beaches, historical waterways, and tons of cultural and recreational experiences. Visit novascotia.com today to start planning your natural getaway.
We're back with Rocky Mountain Superintendent Darla Sidles. Darla, another interesting aspect of managing the park in 2020 was you had the largest wildfires in the national park's history there with the East Troublesome fire and the Cameron Peak fire. That really had to complicate life in the park last year.
Yes, it certainly did. You know, we had the 2 fires, as you mentioned, and the Cameron Peak fire started early in the season on the forest just to the north of us. And, you know, we kind of kept waiting and waiting for that to come into the park or to get closer to the Estes Park area. And our primary concern was that fire. The East Troublesome fire broke out to the west of the park. And it took a while, but when it did finally start spreading in a very aggressive way, it within 24-hour period, it went 18 miles, came into the park's west side, which is our Colorado River District, and very quickly kind of overwhelmed that area. We did evacuations of the park and, of course, the Grand Lake area, Granby, and it kind of sat oddly enough, that particular fire, it kind of screamed through the west side, and strikingly, it was able to jump 1.5 miles up and over our alpine at 12,000 feet, which is kind of unheard of. We used to say that the alpine didn't have to worry about fire spread there, but whether it spread through that alpine or just made the leap over to the east side of the Continental Divide and over to the east side of Rocky, it was a pretty phenomenal event. That fire then, came in to threaten not only the park, but Estes Park. The entire area was evacuated, mandatory evacuation. We did end up out of that East Troublesome fire losing about 26 structures, primarily on the west side, including a lot of our seasonal housing. Much of that loss, unfortunately, was historic. Really sad to see those beautiful historic buildings burn down like that. We had over 50 miles of trails that were impacted, obviously thousands of downed trees. And so we've been doing a lot of work to restore those areas for hiking trails and get as many as possible open this year. And then year after next to get some of that housing and some of that infrastructure on the west side replaced.
So what are you doing with the seasonal housing over there?
Well, so we lost,
Grand Lake?
yeah. So until we are able to actually start building, which is probably going to be another, well, in 2023, we'll be able to start building. In the interim, we tried to lease some housing in the Grand Lake and the Granby area, which is in closest proximity to the park. We were unsuccessful there because, resort communities, right? They can get a lot of money. They don't need what the government, can lease it for. And so we ended up getting temporary seasonal housing in Winter Park, which is an hour away each way. Yeah. And so unfortunately our seasonal staff, some may not even have vehicles, but they are commuting back and forth a couple hours each day. So that's an unfortunate situation that, has really impacted our staff. We did have a number of declinations as a result of not having housing that's, near to the park.
Yeah, that's a situation that you're not alone in dealing with the advent of Airbnb and VRBO. That a lot of homeowners decide that it's more lucrative to put it on the market rather than, as you say, rent it out to the federal government.
Yes, housing on both sides of the park has been a conundrum for a number of years and continues to be a struggle.
I know up at Yellowstone, Cam Shawley, the superintendent, has been able to get some new lodging up there for seasonal employees. And I know Rocky Long, as you mentioned, has needed additional seasonal housing and some new seasonal housing. Any luck in moving that forward? I know you said in 2023, I believe, that you'll work on the west side seasonal housing situation with some new structures.
Yes, so that west side housing as a result of the fire will be replaced. Thankfully, we were able to get the funding for that in 2023. But outside of that, we are continually evaluating our housing, and those that are in the poorest condition, both external and internal, we are looking to demolish those and rebuild in a smarter way. So, for example, maybe we have a 2-bedroom house over here on the east side that we can demolish a couple of those and instead build a dorm that's more efficient, more sustainable, and provides more adequate housing for the particular employment situation that we're trying to resolve. So we are continuing to build housing, but it's not, and you can call it new housing, but it is actually replacement housing. It is not additional housing, unfortunately.
Right. And some of that is still a few years down the road.
Correct, yes.
Now, as far as the fires and what they did to the landscape, how is the landscape recovering? I'm guessing you might have seen some recovery late last year in terms of vegetation coming back. Maybe not. Maybe it was too late in the season. But how do things stand right now?
Yeah, well, we've been very fortunate this year to get as much precipitation as we have, and so we are seeing those annuals come back. I was just out there last week on a hike through one of our hottest areas, and despite it looking kind of like a fried moonscape, there were still wildflowers, grasses, a number of let's see, what did I see? I saw some lupins out there. At any rate, there's a number of things that are coming up in those wetter areas, and as I mentioned, a lot of the landscape looks really burned, but in fact, we did do some soil sampling, and we found that, even though it looks tortured above ground and it looks like the soil was severely burned, actually in a lot of those areas, the roots and the soil structure were able to be maintained. And so, we're lucky to be able to see that some of these, annuals and things are coming up, whether or not we get that aspen too, we're seeing some of that regenerate, but we really haven't yet seen whether ponderosa pine or Douglas fir are going to resprout. So it's just kind of a waiting game. But yeah, this spring it was absolutely beautiful out there in some of the wetter areas of the park.
I'm guessing perhaps some of the wildlife enjoyed that too, moving into meadows that once were forest.
Yes, exactly. So, yeah, it remains to be seen, what the long-term impact and the restoration will be. But, we know we've already seen some positive things already.
Yeah. Has there been problems with erosion due to the fire?
Yes, that's always an issue once you've had a fire. If you're listening to the news at all, you hear often in the Glenwood Canyon area down in southwestern Colorado, the
Right.
Interstate 70 through there is closed, often throughout the summer. We are fortunately not seeing that kind of impacts, but occasionally we will, get a rainfall and soil and ash will come flowing across the road, but we haven't had anything too significant. I think maybe one or two very short closures.
Yeah, yeah. Can you put an acreage number on what the fires covered versus the entire acreage of the park?
Yeah, I believe I'll get this right. I haven't looked at the map in a while. The fires burned about 30,000 acres, and the total of the park is 265. So, almost 30%. Well, I don't do math. Whatever.
I'm not going to take a chance on it myself. I'm a writer.
Are areas reopened to the public, or are there still areas that are closed because of the damage that's been done to the landscape?
Yeah, we've been working really hard, and we've had some great crews and a lot of youth crews working this year to help us, along with our Rocky Mountain Conservancy crews, to help restore those trails. And so, I think I mentioned we had more than 50 miles of trails from both of those fires, and we've reopened about 24 miles of those trails. Just a lot of work to do from, as I mentioned, thousands of downed trees. Hazard trees has probably been the biggest issue, but anywhere there's wood, trail retention structures, I believe about 17 bridges were burned. So we've been doing a lot of work to get those bridges rebuilt, to get those trail structures in place to take care of the erosion that you were just asking about a little while ago. So we do still have some areas closed, and in one or two of those areas, we may be looking at some reroutes where it makes sense to look at trails that are more sustainable, that will kind of resist these sorts of events with flooding and that sort of thing.
Right, right. Safe to say that it's also brought in some researchers to see both how the vegetation is recovering and rebounding and how the wildlife is reacting.
Yes, absolutely. And one of those probably most marked partnerships is over there on the Kawanichi Valley over on the west side of the park. And we've got a good partnership with a number of partners over there to look at that, rehabbing that valley. So, we're watching the effects of the fire where there used to be, a lot of willows and woody vegetation. Those now have been burned to little stumps, but we are seeing, a lot of opportunity to plant additional, willows and birch and those kinds of things. Our end goal over there on the west side and in other areas of the park is where it's possible, if we can improve beaver habitat. We don't know, how successful it will be as beaver coming in naturally, but our goal is to see if we can't improve that habitat, because that kind of environment really helps improve the hydrologic conditions, and the water pools better and slows that water down. So it has kind of a double positive impact of being better for the wildlife as well as being better for hydrology and the ecosystem.
Are park crews assisting the recovery in terms of planting vegetation, or is that something that you prefer just to sit back and watch nature recover on its own?
Yeah, no, we will be proactively doing some of that for sure. And, we'll be doing it in concert with our crews, probably the Rocky Mountain Conservancy crews, as we mentioned before, and other partners. But yeah, we do know that we probably need to be proactive to get some of that regrowth to happen.
Now, summer's pretty much over with. Are things getting back to normal? I know you usually have an elk festival coming up in October. Is that coming back this year?
Yes, it is. The the Estes Park community had stalled some of their public events, but in more recent weeks here, they've restarted them again. So we had the annual Scottish-Irish Festival last weekend, and Elk Fest is coming. So I would like to say we're back to normal, but I don't think we can say that really anywhere here, just from the standpoint of the Delta variant, kind of coming back, and some of the challenges that has presented with larger groups. But it is more quote unquote normal than it was this time last year.
It seems like we're jumping from one new normal to the next new normal with rapid speed.
Right. Yes. Hold on. It's a wild ride.
Well, Superintendent Sidles, thank you so much for joining us today. It's great to hear what's going on in the park and how you're recovering both from COVID and those fires. And it'll be interesting moving forward to watch both how visitor management can be improved and how the forests come back. It'll be great to see.
Well, thanks, Kurt. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you.
That's our show for this week. Thanks for listening. In the coming weeks, we'll be reporting on the problem with feral animals in national parks, animals like wild hogs and horses, and taking a look at efforts to create a new national park in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. And this week, we'll keep you informed on whether a government shutdown on October 1st would close the national parks to the public. For The Traveler, this is Kurt Repenchek.
The composers and musicians at Orange Tree Productions have created a unique collection known as the National Park Series that has grown to include more than 30 CD titles. Composed against the backdrop of a park's sounds of nature, these musical scores will connect you with these beautiful places and take you there, at least in your mind. This collection is the #1 selling National Park audio series in the world and provides the background music for National Parks Travelers podcasts. Visit them at orangetreeproductions.com. Whether it be strategy, business planning, change management, board development, executive search, or diversity planning, Potrero Group is here to help. They mix a depth of experience in the parks and land space with a breadth of best practices from other industries. For more information or to schedule a preliminary conversation, go to potrerogroup.com. That's POTRERO group.com. Western National Parks Association is a nonprofit education partner of the National Park Service. WNPA supports parks across the West, developing products, services, and programs that enhance the visitor experience, understanding, and appreciation of national parks. Learn more at WNPA.org. The Yosemite Conservancy helps visitors connect with Yosemite through adventures, volunteering, and the arts. It's the only nonprofit dedicated to supporting Yosemite National Park and funds grants to improve trails, restore habitat, protect wildlife, and inspire the next generation of nature lovers. Learn more at yosemite.org. Washington State is graced with 3 spectacular national parks, each different and special in their own unique ways. As the official nonprofit partner and the only philanthropic organization dedicated exclusively to supporting these parks through charitable contributions, Washington's National Park Fund has a mission to raise private support to deepen everyone's love for, understanding of, and experiences in Mount Rainier, North Cascades, and Olympic National Parks. Share your passion for these parks at WNPF.org. Editing and production work for the National Parks Traveler podcast is done by Splitbeard Productions. You can learn more about us at splitbeardproductions.com. National Parks Traveler is a 501c3 nonprofit media organization that provides daily editorial coverage of national parks and protected areas. Traveler's coverage is made possible by reader and listener donations. Visit us at nationalparkstraveler.org.